We are good to go. All right, I'm going to answer some questions. I understand there's quite a few. I'm going to get to as many as I can. I have about 45 minutes, so I'll answer as many questions as I can in that time. Get everybody ready for the semifinals, most of the leagues. Which defense, Browns, Chargers, Lions, or Rams? Well, it does depend on your league scoring settings to a degree, but just generally speaking, I like the Browns quite a bit this week. New Orleans is 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to defenses. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of wind in that game. The one concern is that the Saints are able to run the ball on the Browns, who are not particularly good at stopping the run. But I think if there's almost no threat of passing game and Chris Olave's out and Jarvis Landry's out, the wind's going to be 25 mile per hour. Last I saw, if there's really no threat to the passing game, then I think the Browns can kind of load up and stop the run. Obviously, there's going to be tough conditions. Maybe there's a fumble, maybe there's an interception. The Chargers do have a pretty good matchup against Indy. Lions are okay. Good matchup against Carolina, but both those games on the road. Rams, not one I really thought of this week against Denver. I guess you could play them. Russ is back, 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed defenses, but I don't feel great about the Rams defense. So I would go with the Browns. Deesh asks, half PPR, Walker, Swift, Jamal Williams, Pacheco, Rashad, or Pickens. All right, let me pull up our flex rankings on the site. I know Pacheco for sure, so I would run him out there. He is 27th in our flex rankings in half PPR. And then I think Walker would be my next pick, but Walker at 32, Swift at 40. Swift is tempting because he was not on the injury report thus far this week. And when he hasn't been on the injury report, he's seen more touches. So if there's one that I might start over Walker, it would be Swift. Jamal Williams has been kind of quiet. He's always threat for a touchdown. Rashad White, I worry a little bit about his role after last week with Leonard Fournette. I do think he's a decent flex, but I think you have better options. And then Pickens, somebody at 73, I don't think he's really in the running for me. So I think I would go with Pacheco for sure, and then Walker, Swift. If you're not feeling good about Walker, if there's anything that worries you about his injury, then I would roll Swift out there. And I think you could roll Swift out there and feel pretty confident. He's got a pretty good matchup against Carolina. Craig Bailey, which of the following should I start? Jones, Dobbins, Walker, Pacheco, Williams of Detroit, Najee Harris, or Moss? This looks like all running backs. So I don't know this is PPR, right? So PPR, thank you for putting in the scoring system. That helps. Let's see here. Jones, I think I have in the top 10. I do have him at 9. So I definitely would go with him. My next choice would be Pacheco. No, next choice would be Najee Harris. So if you just want to start one, I would go with Aaron Jones against Miami. That should be a pretty high scoring game. All right. Rank top 2 wide receiver matchups this week. So you just want the matchups. All right, half PPR. All right. So that's Goodwin, not Godwin. Goodwin's got a pretty good matchup. KC is 21st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. And if you're not a subscriber of 4for4, when I'm talking about adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers, basically we take fantasy points allowed by position a step further and adjust it for the strength of schedule of that defense. So if a defense faces the 5 best running backs in the first 5 weeks, then they get credit for that, and their adjusted fantasy points is adjusted for that, so that they don't look quite as bad, because they aren't quite as bad. Their schedule is really tough. So we adjust for the strength of the schedule. In this situation, Goodwin, I think if he were not questionable, I'd feel pretty strong about him. Right now, I have him at 29. Chark's got a pretty good matchup. Carolina, they're 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. He obviously had a couple good games there, and then a real quiet game last week. He's a pretty good play. Burks, I would not mess with, given the run-pass splits. Malik Willis, in his 2 starts, attempted 24 passes, and they ran it 76 times. So on average, 12 pass attempts per game in his 2 starts, unless they decide they're going to open things up, which they really shouldn't. They should be able to run the ball pretty easily on Houston. So I think that's what they're going to do. I believe in the last game against Houston, they had 10 pass attempts and 45 rushes. So I would not start Burks this week. Chris Moore is certainly interesting. He's got a nice matchup against Tennessee in that same game. 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So right now I have him, of these guys, ranked the highest. KJ Osborne, the Giants are 22nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers, and Dotson, 19th. The 49ers really are good against the run, so receivers tend to do okay against them. This is an interesting question because we're trying to figure out this Colts backfield. I think in PPR I lean Deion Jackson. He is a little bit better of a passing down back, but let me double check routes run last week. Once Jonathan Taylor went out. Zach Moss actually ran 14 routes. Deion Jackson ran 9 routes. Just keep that in mind. I think Deion Jackson's a better player. So that's my lean right now. But they did last week feed Moss, and it does seem like they want to see what they have in him. And then Deion Jackson got the touchdown. So I just kind of lean that way. I lost my window here. Okay, here we go. Dynasty championship game. Need to sit one. Godwin, Stevenson, or Waddle. I don't know what high performance PPR means. But man, what a problem to have. You have to bench one of these 3. In the flex, I have Stevenson at 9, Godwin 17, and Waddle at 22. This is a little bit tricky because Damian Harris's status might alter Stevenson's ranking. So if he's in, Stevenson moves down a little bit. But he's also questionable with that foot ankle injury. So, right now I have it Stevenson, Godwin, Waddle, but that could change if Damian Harris is active. You might want to start the 2 receivers. I have PPR. Which receiver would you start? Watson, London, Goodwin, or Marquise Brown? I would definitely not consider Brown this week, given the groin injury he picked up. So I think it's down to those other 3, and I would go with Watson, given his explosiveness. And he was a little quiet last week, but he still saw 6 targets. Can take it to the house at any given moment. And I think this Dolphins game, Packers game, could be a shootout track meet. So I would go with Watson. Swift, Pacheco, Fournette, or Hunt in PPR. I believe it's Pacheco for me. Swift is a little bit tempting. I have Pacheco at 16 and Swift at 18. So it's pretty close in PPR and full PPR. If you want to, the Pacheco's got the great matchup against Seattle. They're giving up like over 5 yards per carry to running backs, and he should see 15 to 18 carries in that game. I think he's due for a touchdown as well. But if you want to roll with Swift, I think it's close enough that you can justify it. And the fact that he's not on the injury report does indicate that he's going to play a little bit more this week. You have Pacheco, McKinnon. Should you start both, or just do one and go with Dobbins or Swift? And we don't know what scoring system this is, but I think I lean McKinnon in half PPR. I definitely McKinnon in PPR. If you do start both, you're raising your floor. This is a great matchup for KC in this running game. But you're also lowering your ceiling in theory because there's only so many carries and touches to go around the backfield. However, these two have combined for a lot of points over the last 2 weeks, but it's been mostly McKinnon doing it. If you want to shoot for upside, then you would bench Pacheco and hope that McKinnon stays hot, and then start somebody like Swift or Dobbins. Certainly Swift in PPR, Dobbins probably in half PPR in that scenario. You're facing Mahomes. Should you still go Chubb over McKinnon in half PPR? Yeah, you're trying to offset the possible touchdowns passes for McKinnon. I don't know if he stays hot. He's obviously got 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I think Chubb's going to run a lot. This is going to be a very run-heavy game in the wind. I would lean his way, but if you are feeling pretty good about the rest of your roster, then you could run McKinnon out there to try to offset what could be a big game for Mahomes. I don't hate this play at all if you think that the rest of your roster is strong enough to maybe overcome a slight potential downgrade to Chubb to McKinnon. However, McKinnon obviously has been the number 1 running back over the last 2 weeks, so it makes sense to start him if you have Mahomes. I have Chris Moore 12 spots higher. Oh, hi, Tom. How you doing? You've Chris Moore 12 spots higher than Goodwin, even with Cooks likely playing. Please talk about how you see Moore versus Goodwin. Sure. So, yes, Cooks back in the fold. Cooks hasn't been the number 1 receiver for Houston this year. It's really been more Nico Collins. Cooks hasn't been very good. The fact that he is back really affects the other Houston receivers, I think, more than Chris Moore. Chris Moore has a pretty, really good matchup actually against Tennessee. Goodwin, I do like, but I am a bit concerned about the ankle injury that he has, but not too concerned about it. I do think he's a sneaky start, but I would just go with Moore. His role right now is pretty significant. I think he has almost 20 targets in the last 2 games, if not more. So that's kind of how I look at it. I don't think that Cooks just walks back into wide receiver 1 role in Houston. I think Moore right now is more likely to see more targets. I do. Thank you for putting the PPR, but I guess you don't need to do that for quarterbacks. I have Herbert 1 spot ahead of Tua. I like the matchup a little bit better for the Chargers. Games indoors. I think there might be a bit of a rain shower or whatever in that Green Bay Miami game, but I like both players a lot. They're both in my top 5. I've got Herbert a little bit higher. Got to pick a flex full PPR. Hopkins or Montgomery in the cold. The other thing to keep in mind with Chicago is that Khalil Herbert's back. So Montgomery's like heavy workload may not be there for sure. I think in full PPR, my initial lean is Hopkins, but let me double check my rankings. Yeah, I've got Montgomery at 38, Hopkins at 27. Yes, you have a 3rd string quarterback in there, but Hopkins can get targets from anyone, or he draws targets consistently. Tampa's kind of tough to run on. Marquise Brown is dinged up. I just think his volume should be there from McSorley. Ooh, bonus for passing yards and completions. 6 points per passing touchdown. Danny Dimes or Gardner Minshew. He's This is it, man. This is one of the questions of the week, right? We're trying to stream the quarterback position. Do you go with if you're Jalen Hurts manager? Do you go with his backup Minshew or Danny Dimes? Jones has been pretty good. He's like QB 11 on the season. I'm not sure what he is in 6 point per pass touchdown. He doesn't pass, for a lot of touchdowns. He's more of a, getting his points through the running game. So just in a standard 6 point passing touchdown league, I have Jones projected for 17.4 and Gardner Minshew projected for 17.2. That probably doesn't help you a whole lot. I think there's upside to both players. Minnesota is a great matchup for Jones, 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Dallas is 5th in that metric, so they're a tougher matchup, but they're a little bit dinged up. They obviously gave up a huge game to Trevor Lawrence last week. And if you're getting bonuses for passing yards and completions, I think I would go with completions. Yeah, I mean, I've got Minshew right now for about 30 yards more passing and 2 more completions. So, and also 1.3 touchdowns versus 1 touchdown. So I think that would be enough to bump Gardner Minshew over Jones. Half PPR, Nuke or Miles Sanders. Let's see here. Miles Sanders at 30, Hopkins at 35. They're separated by 0.4 points. Hopkins has the better positional matchup, but is also playing, as we mentioned, with the third string quarterback. You would think that the Eagles would ride the running game a little bit more with Minshew in, but I really don't think they're going to change it a whole lot, and they might have to throw the ball because of Dallas's offense. So I think I would probably, I think I would stick with Miles Sanders, but I think he's more of a higher floor guy, and Hopkins has this more of a ceiling in that game against Tampa, since Tampa's not very good against the pass. Njoku, Taysom Hill, Fant. Okay, I'm definitely in this situation going with Taysom. I don't know if you saw the news earlier, but they might go quote unquote full Taysom this week, given the conditions in Cleveland. They may just not try to throw the ball a whole lot and just run it with Kamara and Taysom Hill. So I think I would go Hill. Maybe he breaks one for a touchdown. And Njoku in that game, not crazy about him. He's obviously a very talented tight end, but the passing games in that game are going to be downgraded for me. And Fant's a pretty good play, but I certainly would have Taysom higher in the situation. Full PPR, I have Fournette and White. White is projected more, but Fournette has looked better. Fantasy player lately. Who do you start? So full PPR, running backs. I have Fournette ahead of White in half PPR. Let me see what full PPR. No, I have. I'm not sure which projection you're looking at. Maybe not looking at 4-for-4 projections, but in full PPR, I've got Fournette at 20, and I've got Rachaad White at 31. They're separated by about 2 points. Fournette did kind of retake the lead role, but that might have been due to game script in that game. But Arizona is very generous. I think Fournette will be involved no matter what, and could get there either way. I would go with Fournette this week. Zach Moss or Chris Moore. Okay, we talked about Cook's return. I don't think it affects his targets too much. There's still so many targets available in Houston that I think Chris Moore continues to, see 7+ targets per game. In the flex half PPR. Let me double check that. Moss is at 67 with 8.6 projected. Chris Moore is at 61 with 9.3 projected points. So I think I would probably go with Moore. If you do think that Moss is going to be the lead back and see another 20 touches, then I would totally understand it playing against the Chargers. That's a pretty good matchup for Moss, but I don't know how this backfield is going to shake out. I don't have a good feeling on it. So I would go with Moore. Russell asks, you need 3: Mike Williams, Judy, Watson, Gabe Davis, or Higgins. Okay, I would steer clear of Gabe Davis because of he's been up and down, but there's that giant wind forecast in Chicago, so just cross him off. So I think it's down to these other 3, and you're looking at half PPR. So let's see here. I've got Mike Williams at 14, Higgins at 17, Judy at 19, and Watson at 22. So depending on Cortland Sutton, I think if he's looking like a full go, I might downgrade Jerry Judy a bit. But right now I would go with Williams, Higgins, and Judy. And then if it looks like Sutton's a full go, I might downgrade and Judy into the mid-20s, and that puts him below Christian Watson. How much am I downgrading Pittman with Foles? Not much at all. I mean, Matt Ryan has not been particularly good this year. I don't think that Foles coming in is much of a downgrade at all. It does, open up the question of whether or not he'll have a nice rapport with Pittman. We don't know. That might be the one issue. But Goodwin, I have at 29.5 PPR, and I have Pittman at 21. Understandable. I wouldn't talk you out of it if you're worried about that Foles Pittman rapport, but I would think that this week of practice they would get it going, and who knows, he might be somebody that Foles targets frequently, even more so than Ryan did. Full PPR, Hopkins, Connor, and Aaron Jones. That's a good problem to have, huh? Full PPR. My gut says Connor and Hopkins, but let's see. Connor at 21. I'm sorry. My gut says Connor and Jones. Let's see. Jones is high. He's up at 20. Connor's at 21. Hopkins, I think, is at 27. Yeah, so I'd go with the 2 running backs in this game. Joe, another question from Russell. Joe Burrow or Fields? I would go with Burrow. Fields certainly has a lot of rushing upside, but I don't know how much he's going to be able to throw in that wind. And Burrow's been pretty on fire. Oh, I need a flex, and you're choosing amongst these guys. That's nice. All right, so let's see where Kamara is here. Kamara at 25 in the flex, Waddle at 22, Lamb at 14, McLaurin I think is down below at 33. So I would go amongst this group. I would go with CeeDee Lamb. It is a tougher matchup, but he's been the best receiver of this group. And then I guess you could make, if you're uncomfortable with the matchup, you could argue that Waddle is the right play there. Minshew or Purdy, I would go with Minshew. Purdy's been pretty good, but they're run oriented. Obviously Philly is as well, but they've got a great receiving core, and I think they're going to have to score a lot of points to keep up with Dallas. Just Jeff Wilson, I assume that's Jeff Wilson sits. Would you play Mostert over Dobbins in PPR? PPR, huh? I think Jeff Wilson's going to play. He was close last week. He's been practicing. I think he is going to play. I've got Mostert right now at 26, Dobbins at 24. So yes, I think if Wilson did sit, that's enough to bump Mostert up 1 point. He did have a great game last week, and it's a better matchup against the Packers, who can't stop the run. All right, guys, I've got about 20 minutes. Cooper, DPJ, or Latavius Murray. Now, I am really low on these pass catchers in Cleveland, Saints, Bears, pretty much everybody except for the Stephon Diggs. So I think this is going to end up being Latavius. To make sure he's healthy enough to play, but he's at 47. And then I've got Cooper 85 in the flex, and Peoples-Jones 107. I mean, there's 25 plus mile per hour wins in Cleveland. It's going to be pretty ugly there. I don't think the passing game is going to go well. I know your rankings have Mike Andrews higher than Goddard, but Huntley connection hasn't materialized yet. Please elaborate on your confidence in Andrews. I think you could, if you're worried about Andrews, it makes sense. You could run Goddard out there. I have him at 5. I have Andrews at 2. Andrews has the better matchup. Atlanta's 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. I do think that he gets it going. I have confidence in him as a player, but it may not happen this week. I don't think that the difference here, which is 1.8 points, I don't think it's big enough that I would sit here and talk you out of Goddard. So I hope that, I try to approach the rankings as I'm your buddy who spends all week looking at this, and here's my take on it. I'm not always right. I think even the best fantasy analysts are wrong 35% of the time. So if you are uncomfortable with Andrews given the recent production, and that's understandable, then Goddard is a good play at Dallas. And last time he played with Minshew, he had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Half point per flex: Foreman, Moss, Freiermuth, or Dotson. Wow, this is okay. So we got tight ends, we got receivers, we got running backs. I'm not high on Foreman really at all due to the matchup against the Lions. They've been excellent against the run. They're first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, and that's over the last 10 weeks. So I've got him at 87. Moss is at 67. Freiermuth at 103. And then Dotson is at 102. So I think I would go in half PPR. I would go with Moss, given the likelihood that he's the lead back. I'm not 100% confident in that, but it's, he had the 24 carries last week, and he's got a pretty good matchup against the Chargers. Hey, Kyle. Nice to see you again. Season's greetings to you as well. Canine. What is that, do we think? Producer Sal, do you know what canine means? Big Mike Williams, Ken Walker. Oh, okay. Big Mike Williams, Rashad White, or Kenneth Walker. And that's half PPR. Looks like a flex. So Williams in the world. 36 for Mike Williams. Walker at 32. And then White, I believe, is down below at 55. So it's really between White certainly could win this matchup, but it's between Walker and Mike Williams. And I think it comes down to the injury and how confident you are in Walker's health, and Pete Carroll saying that he's good to go. Pete Carroll does have a tendency to overestimate his players' health. So I think it's close enough that if that concerns you and you're not totally sold on Walker, you could certainly go with Mike Williams. It's a Monday night game, makes it exciting to see if you can come back with Big Mike. But it's indoors, no worry about the weather or anything like that. So pretty good matchup against the Colts as well. Um, so I think it really comes down to that ankle injury. Any more news that we might get over the weekend or as we head into the games might make that decision a little bit easier. But I think it's between those two, and just to kind of cross White off your list. Full PPR: London, Pickens, Chris Moore, and Chuba. I believe you need a third receiver and a flex. Okay. I believe Chris Moore. I think people are just a little nervous about Chris Moore. It's understandable, but he's had a nice role the last 2 weeks. Nothing's really changed. He's just got a better receiver playing next to him. But let's see these other guys. So Pickens. Pickens at 76. One for Chris Moore. Chuba, 58. London at 74. So I think Chuba. The reason he's a little bit appealing against Detroit is that they're going to have trouble running the ball, and he's much better passing back than Donta Foreman. So I think that's why we've got him there. I've got him for about 9 carries for 35 yards and then 3 catches for 27 yards. And then I think Chris Moore is a pretty solid start. If you're worried about Chuba, then it looks like London and Pickens are pretty neck and neck. I probably would lean in that situation. They're both at 10 points projected. I probably would lean Pickens just because it's a better matchup, but I don't really feel good about either one of these quarterback situations. Merry Christmas, Kyle. All right, you got about 13 minutes left. Hey, man, I appreciate all your help. Pick 2, Zeke, Walker, or Pacheco. Okay, I would definitely, I don't know what scoring system this is. I'm going to assume half PPR. Elliott at 17, Pacheco at 15, Walker at 20. Again, Walker's where he's at because of this foot ankle thing. And let's just take a look at this. I'm getting a lot of Walker questions here. Walker ankle. He was he did not participate on Tuesday. Let me double check all this here. And then I believe that the injury report says, here it is. All right. Did not participate Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Ankle and back. Listed as questionable. Pete says he's going to play. See, that worries me enough to just bench him for these other two. You got 2 other good options here. Philly is tough to throw on, so that they're going to go a lot of Pollard and Zeke. He's got multiple touchdowns. Streak going. So I think Walker would be the one I'd bench in this situation. Start 2 full PPR: Zeke, Rachaad White, Dobbins, Keenan Allen, or Lamb. Interesting question. It's fun to get these questions sometimes because I get to see what kind of teams you all have. I believe it's going to be Keenan Allen and Lamb, but let's double check. Lamb at 14, Keenan at 26, Ezekiel Elliott at 34. Yeah, I don't know if Rachaad White's going to be below him. Dobbins is going to be below him because he doesn't catch passes. So I go with the 2 receivers. Championship game. Need one for tight end slot. Yes, Taysom Hill. Now let me just talk about this report too. This is not like an official team report or anything, but Nick Underhill is pretty plugged in. He's with New Orleans football website, basically saying that since it's going to be very, very tough throwing conditions, that might see a lot of Hill at quarterback running the ball with the occasional pass here and there. And he's obviously has a chance to break one at any time. So I think in this situation, I would go with Taysom. Everett has been downgraded a little bit because Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are both back, so he's not as big a part of the passing game as he was when those guys were injured. And I don't think Hunter Henry's in the conversation right now, so I would go with Taysom. Sitting one, David Montgomery, Fournette, Swift, or Indy running backs. I don't know if you're saying start one or sit one. If you just stay away from the Indy. If you're just trying to pick one of these guys to sit, then sit Moss / Jackson. I would start Monty and the other two guys, which I've Swift and somebody else. Fournette. Moss or Hubbard PPR. Let's see here. I think it's going to be Hubbard. Yeah, I've got Hubbard a little higher. Where's Moss at? Yeah. I've got Hubbard projected for about 11.2, Moss for about 9.1. That said, if you look at last week's workload for Moss and you think he's going to see 20 touches, then Moss is probably the right play. I just don't know how this backfield is going to shake out this week. And I'm still modifying my projections, thinking about those projections. But right now I have Moss with 13 carries, Deion Jackson with 10. If it's more like 15 and 5, and Moss gets some catches, then he's gonna probably outscore Hubbard. Wow, we got exclamation point sign plus a red alert PPR. Schultz versus Hill, I would go with Schultz in PPR, especially given the nice conditions for Dallas. He's been good with Dak Prescott. Then you've got Walker, Najee, Pacheco, Dobbins, Aaron Jones, and Swift. Okay, so in PPR, those were all running backs. So I'll just go to my running back rankings. I'll make it easier to find. Jones for sure. You're picking 3. Okay, Jones for sure. Najee is at 14. He's got a great matchup against Vegas. They're 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. They're more likely to score rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns as well. So I would start him. And then I would start as my third Pacheco. I think that's the question. Do you want to start Pacheco or Dobbins or Walker? But I do have Pacheco fairly high. I mean, this matchup against Seattle is pretty amazing. Let me pull up our defensive knowledge seeker here, and I'll just look at Seattle for since week 12. And they are yielding an average of 174 yards rushing to opponent backfields, 1.75 touchdowns, 5.46 yards per carry, and then also giving up 5.25 receptions on average and 46 receiving yards and a quarter of a touchdown through the air as well. So you're looking at like 220 something total yards, 220 total yards and 2 touchdowns allowed over the last 4 weeks. And we're not even talking about these great backfields. They did face Christian McCaffrey and Josh Jacobs, but they also, Cam Akers and the Carolina backfield. So I think that both Pacheco and McKinnon have good weeks. I think I answered all those questions there. PPR flex, I would go with DJ Moore. I wrote up Moore as a sneaky start. If I can find that real quick. Or if I can find it slowly. With Darnold back, Moore has 3 games with him, 4 for 103 and a touchdown on 6 targets. Then he had a goose egg, and then he had 5 for 73 and a touchdown on 6 targets. I don't think he'll have a bad game because he's got such a good matchup against Detroit, 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. Part of that is due to Detroit becoming a run funnel or a pass funnel because they're so good at stopping the running game. So I think Moore will see plenty of targets, plenty of work. I think he's the pick amongst these guys. Burks, Deontay Johnson, or Jacoby Myers. I can tell you this one off a full PPR. I'm pretty sure this is going to be Jacoby Myers, but I will double check for you. As I mentioned earlier, Burks is a fade this week. I like him as a player, but given the run pass splits with Willis at quarterback, I'm not wanting to start any of these Titan pass catchers. There's not going to be enough volume for him. Deontay Johnson would be significantly higher if Kenny Pickett weren't starting. But with Pickett starting, then he and Deontay don't have a very good rapport. I've got Deontay at 38, and I've got Jacoby Myers at 31. Myers' matchup is pretty good against Cincinnati, 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. He is still questionable on our site, so keep an eye on that. I got 5 minutes now. PPR, Watson or Evans, playing Tom Brady in place of Hurts. I'm smiling because Mike Evans has been popping in our breakout receiver model for about a month and hasn't gotten a touchdown. I have him at 16. I've got Christian Watson at 22. I do like his matchup against Arizona. Evans has not scored a touchdown since week 4, but he's got 9 targets in back-to-back games, and in 3 of the last 4. I think he's really overdue and could have a big game. I would lean his way in the, Watson, I like him quite a bit as well. Just downgraded him a little bit this week because Romeo Doubs looked good, and whenever Doubs was on the field, Rodgers was looking his way. I think Watson's still a strong play, but I feel like Mike Evans is extremely overdue for a touchdown or 2. Oh God, Njoku or Okonkwo. This is full standard. I would. I don't know if you can stream somebody. I don't know who might be out there for you. I don't like either one of these tight ends this week due to the weather in Cleveland, and this is standard, right? Weather in Cleveland and the run pass splits for the Titans with Willis at quarterback. Maybe you could pick up Noah Fant, Jordan Akins. If not, if you don't feel comfortable with that, I do have Njoku at 17 and Okonkwo at 29 because I just don't think there's going to be many targets to go around in Tennessee. So of those 2, I would say Njoku, but I do have Fant at 14, Akins at 15. So there might be an opportunity to stream in better conditions there than what we're going to see there in Cleveland. I just want to mention that we did see Evan Ingram do well in the rain last night, but it wasn't nearly as windy as what's going to be in Cleveland. Half PPR, Elliott or Murray. Ezekiel Elliott in this situation, he's been pretty hot in terms of scoring touchdowns. Dallas is going to need to run the ball. They're going to have more trouble throwing it probably with those good secondary for the Eagles. So I think Ezekiel Elliott is a good start. Okay, I got time for a few more. 2 more minutes. So this must be Gus Edwards. I would go with Latavius Murray. He had the big game last week. As long as he's healthy enough to play, I think he's he should be good to go. I've got him at 25, and this is in standard. You want PPR. Let me look at PPR. He's a pretty good pass catcher. I would go with Murray in that situation. Gus is about 10 spots lower. He doesn't catch many passes. All right, Matt Powers asks Judy, Pittman, or Swift in the flex half PPR. Half PPR. Flex. Judy, Pittman, or Swift. I think it's Judy right now. Oh, Judy is ahead of Pittman, but Swift is the pick. Swift's at 40. about a 1 point ahead of Judy. I am kind of thinking about moving Swift up a little bit, given the workload that he has seen when he's not been on the injury report. And it is a pretty good matchup against Carolina, 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. Dustin Carmichael. We've got more emojis. Murray or Mostert, standard league. I always smirk when I see people are still playing standard. You guys need to go point per first down. That is the ticket. Latavius Murray in standard. Oh, wait a second here. Murray in standard, looking at 25. Mostert at 23. And I would agree with that, because Mostert is better in standard. Not as big of a pass catcher, but Green Bay can be had on the ground. Sorry about that. Drop Koala Bear asks, flex Deontay or Zach Moss in standard. I believe it's Zach Moss in standard. I'm not high. I mean, I love Deontay Johnson, but not with Kenny Pickett at quarterback. I've got Deontay at 109 in standard, and Zach Moss at 55. So fairly easy decision there. That's even kind of thinking that this Indy backfield might be a fairly even split, but it might be more Moss based on what they did last week. All right, one more question. Ramondre Pollard or DJ Moore in the flex full PPR. God, it'd be wonderful to have these types of problems. Delani. Pollard at 15. Ramondre at 9. Moore is going to be lower than that. He's at 31. So it's really between Ramondre and Pollard. And I think Ramondre is has a higher ceiling, lower floor based on Damien Harris's situation and his foot ankle injury. So I think Pollard is probably safer. But Stevenson, I mean, Pollard has some good upside as well, but Stevenson's sort of up or down based on whether or not Damien Harris is available and his full injury. So just keep that in mind when you're setting your pick. If you want a higher floor, I think maybe Pollard is the play, but he also has a pretty good ceiling as well. All right. Appreciate the questions. As producer Sal says, good luck to you all in week 16. Go out and get those championships, and feel free to tweet at me your scoreboard and let me know how you did.